What's up, guys, and welcome back to Stereotherapy. I'm your host, Lisa, and as always, I'll have my wonderful co host, Justine, along with me. If it's your first time here, Stereotherapy is a podcast that showcases the importance of music and mental health. Sometimes Justine and I will share our own stories of how music has made an impact, and other times we have some great guests to share their own story as well. Today, we were joined by Steve Parpart. He is host of the Something in the Wilderness podcast. This is a podcast that dives deep into the catalog of Andrew McMahon. Whether you're a fan of Jack's Mannequin, Something Corporate, Andrew McMahon in the Wilderness, or I feel just music in general, you'll enjoy this. Steve it does an amazing job on his podcast of doing these deep dives into the songs, and each episode showcases a specific song in an artwork of Andrew McMahon. So it was really exciting to get to talk to him, and I was really excited because Steve at the previous podcast wanted to hop on, didn't quite work out, but this time it did. And I really appreciated his patience and his kindness throughout that. As always, I'll have all the links below in the description if you want to check out his podcast. But we really dive deep too, as well, with Steve on how music is therapeutic to him, how he has used music in his life, how he balances his home life and his podcast, what advice he can give, and just all things music. And this was such a fun conversation, and I feel it could have gone on a lot longer than it did. Again, I hope you really enjoy this one. Remember, you can head over to our website at www.stereotherapypod.com. You could leave us a rating, a review on Spotify, wherever you're listening to this, or Apple, any of those search engines. It really helps us out and help people find our podcast as well. So why don't we get to know Steve Parpart, and maybe you'll find your new favorite podcast as well. I hope at least this is a really good one, and I hope you enjoy this podcast. Here's our conversation with Steve Parpart of the Something in the Wilderness podcast. Thank you so much for wanting to come on and
Yeah, of course.
being patient with us. And I know like you've had a long day traveling too, driving back and forth probably and seeing your man Andrew. So I appreciate it. But how was
Sure.
that?
It was amazing. I mean, I think I may have seen my favorite Andrew show in the last 24 hours, so it was that good. It was amazing. I mean, yeah, the intimacy, we were right up front, which really helped, and we knew we have met a lot of the people before that were there up front with us, which was fun. It was so fun seeing everybody. But it just felt like hanging out. I rarely get this experience at a concert. It felt like hanging out in someone's living room and Andrew's just playing for us. And he's just talking to people in the crowd and playing his songs and telling stories and making us laugh. And it was just a really good communal experience. So
Oh, that's so awesome. I haven't been able to see Andrew play in, gosh, so long. I want to
Oh
say,
my gosh. Yeah, it's been a while for me too.
ooh, I don't want to say 2010, but it was when Something Corporate did a show, and it was like a
mhm.
little that side, not
Bamboozle.
the Bamboozle Roadshow.
Yeah.
Or that was the last time I want to say I've gotten to see him in
Mhm.
anything he's done. And it's such a shame because he's so talented in anything he does. And I'm like, I saw your post, I see everybody's post. I'm like, I need to get out there. And I love the new record he put out. I need
Mhm.
to get out there. So that's so awesome to hear that those experiences are still like that all those years
Mhm.
later. Cause I remember back then that community, and again, he was someone, he came out, it was freezing cold, it was raining. Every single person got a picture. Every
Mhm.
single person got a hug, whatever it was. So that makes me so happy that's still that way all these years later.
Yeah, he really puts a lot of emphasis on building the community around him, and you can feel the love from him, and then around you with the people that go to his shows. So it's so nice. I haven't felt that. There's a lot of artists I love. I go see a lot of artists. I follow a lot of musicians, and some are able to do that, and some aren't, or maybe aren't willing to. I don't know,
Mhm.
but it seems like he puts a lot of emphasis in that and puts a lot of work into it, and kind of knows that's part of what people love about him. That's why I keep going back to the shows. That's why I wanted to start a podcast about him. It was I just wanted to be part of that. I just wanted to be, I just want to be involved in that. So
Oh, I love that. I love that. And I know,
Mhm.
um, for you, what do you think, obviously loving music and doing what you do with your podcast, what do you think has been the first memory you can have of falling in love with music?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, I think I remember a moment, and it may have been before this, but I
Yeah.
do. So my family had a motorhome growing up, like an RV, and we had this. It was such a cool setup. I don't know if you're still allowed to do this or whatever. I assume people still like ride in the back of RVs or on. Anyway, there was like a bed loft above where you drive from, and so my brother and I, or my best friend Jamie, if he was with us, we would ride up on top, and there was a window you could look out. So you were having the same view as the driver, but from up top. So it was like, and you're just laying down. So you're like laying on the bed. And we had a boom box, because it was like probably the early 90s.
Mhm.
And we had a boom box, and we would play like Aerosmith was one. And that's so it may have been the late 80s too, because I specifically remember listening with my brother to Aerosmith's Permanent Vacation, which I think if you look back, it came out in like 86, 87, but it may have been a few years later when I got a hold of it. I'm not really sure.
Mhm.
But I remember like that was the album with like Ragdoll and Angel and
Okay.
Dude Looks Like a Lady, and like just the hit, those
Yeah.
those hits. So the goofy, hits that Aerosmith did in the 80s. So um but that was such a moment for me when I was like, wow, I love this music. And it was the first album or tape, whatever it was back then, that I felt connected to all the way through and I wanted to go back to. That's what I remember about that. And then in that same spot, this is just, memories faded, but like this is what I remember is I kind of got into like rap and R&B during like from like 5th grade to about 8th grade. And I'm not really anymore. I was
Mhm.
just for a little bit there. Sorry. I was just for a little
No.
bit there. And and then my friend, I was 8th grade, and my friend Jamie introduced me to Pearl Jam 10
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
and in the early 90s, and that changed. That was like, okay, it's rock music now. Like
Mhm.
there's nothing else. That's for a long time I was like that, probably the entire 90s into the probably about 10 years ago. It was just rock music. I was like, it's got to have a guitar, it's got to be
Mhm.
rock. And I was into like all kinds of rock. I mean, pop rock, alternative rock, hard rock, whatever. um but I did eventually open my ears to pop music as well, and that took a little while for me to come around. But now I can kind of see the connection across all the genres now, and I'm much more open minded to all the genres of music than I used to be. For a while there, I was just so fixated on like it's got to be this or else,
Mhm.
or it can't be for me. Which looking back, I shouldn't have been that way. I should have been more open. I probably would have heard a lot of good music from all these genres, like rap, like R&B, even country. Like I never even listened to any of that. It probably took meeting my wife to open my ears to pop music, honestly. But then I'm able to go back and I'm like, yeah, okay, that early 2000s pop, I can see where people were coming from with that. And now modern pop, my daughters keep me current pretty much with the modern pop music. And there's a lot to love out there too about that stuff. And yeah, but yeah, I trace it way back to maybe Aerosmith Permanent Vacation to Pearl Jam 10, somewhere in those few years where I was like, there's music I love and there's music I want to listen to over and over again. Before that point, it was just, like a lot of us, whatever our parents were playing, right, in the car.
Right. Yeah. Oh, for sure. Like we're just in our 90s era with our 90s stuff we have coming out, and
Oh,
it's just like,
nice.
and it's just is like with us diving into certain bands that we're okay, we're gonna pick only 3, which are really tough, but even us, like, it'll be like, "Oh, wow, this podcast is an hour or something," or and it's like, but there's so much music, and especially those bands, like, even me being 37, it's like, even though I heard, like, Aerosmith was huge in my house, or
Hmm.
Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, all those bands were so huge in my house, and it's like, I that's what made us fall in love. We were just talking about on an episode 2 we recorded where it's
Right.
like, without that, like, again, like, there's you like music that you would hear in the car, but then there's just, like, you hear something and, I mean, that's it, and there's
Yeah.
your path, so it's
Flips
so
a
cool.
switch. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I know that listening to Weezer, our podcast, was a big inspiration for sharing this podcast. How is that band special to you?
Well, it was a similar actually. So I guess I left that part out of my story.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you asked because that was another special album that kind of came to me. It was brought to me, actually in that case, someone played it for me. So it was like I heard. I'll go back to the beginning of Weezer for a moment. So I
Yeah.
heard "Undone the Sweater" song like on the radio or on MTV, and I was like, "What is this?" Like that's okay, whatever. And then my buddy bought the CD and he was like, no, or maybe it might have even been the cassette tape. I think because even when all of us had CDs in the 90s, this guy was still listening to cassette tapes for some reason. So he was
Yeah.
like, which apparently is cool again. I don't know.
Wow.
Everything comes back around. It would have been like somebody in the late 80s, early 90s listening to vinyl, like, oh, who listens to vinyl? And now everybody does,
Oh,
apparently.
yeah. Right.
But he had probably a tape of the Blue album and he played it and we were like, oh my gosh, what is that? That's amazing. It's like something I had never heard before and something I couldn't even describe other than just call it what we were calling everything at the time alternative rock. But Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Weezer, all very different bands, but we just lumped them all together and called them alternative rock. And we're like, yeah, we like alternative rock. And whatever it was though, I loved it. And when I get serious into an artist, Andrew McMahon being an example, Weezer, I follow them forever. Like I'm ride or die. There was a sketch on SNL a few years ago. I don't know if you caught it with Matt Damon, and it was like and he was saying he's ride or die Weezer and trying to convince everybody at the Thanksgiving dinner table why Weezer's still relevant and still great. And this was just like a few years ago. So it was really funny. And I think Weezer actually posted about it and they loved it too. And but that's how I am. I've been like tooting their horn and like being their cheerleader for this whole time. And every time they come out with songs or an album that I think one of my friends who, used to be really into them like I was, likes them, I'm like, dude, you got to check out this song. You got it. No, you don't understand. Like, I know you think it's just like Beverly Hills and that goofy stuff they were doing, for a little while. And they've had those, quirky hits and things. And some of that's good too. But like, there are legit great songs from Weezer. And I've been following them ever since. And I have my buddy, one of my best friends, Dan, to thank for that because he introduced me to them. I think I probably would have come by them eventually because they released Pinkerton, as you probably know, 2 years later after the Blue album. And that album, like, put me on my head, like put me on my back. Like I was just like floored. I'd never heard anything like it again. It was like a whole, like doing the whole thing over again with Weezer, which I loved. So after Blue and Pinkerton, I was like, whatever they make, I'm going to listen to it. I'm going to love it. And I'm going to tell everybody about it. So, but yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because like there's weirdly several Weezer focused podcasts out there. And I was like, looking at my other favorite artists and I was like, oh, I'm going to go listen to some Andrew McMahon podcasts now. And there were none. So
wow.
I was like, well, someone has to make one. I guess it'll be me.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh. I didn't even realize that there were like a bunch of Weezer podcasts. So
yeah, I'd highly recommend it. There's a few. Weez Talking About Weez is a funny one. So it's just two guys who go through the albums one by one. It's kind of a shorter because it's just album by album. And then Post Pinkerton's really good because Post Pinkerton, he doesn't talk about any Blue or Pinkerton songs at all. And it's a song focus. So I took a lot of inspiration from him. I don't even know the guy, but it's a song by song podcast. Every episode is about a song. And some of them are like 5 minutes and some of them are like an hour. But yeah, there's another one out there. I can't, We Are Weezer is the other one. And she's really good too. And again, a song focused one, which also inspired me for my podcast. So I highly recommend people check those out if you're into Weezer. And I'll just go with it. Like if you haven't listened to the last couple of Weezer albums, like you need to dig in because there's some really good stuff in there. You might hear some stuff you don't like, but there's definitely really good stuff in there.
I'll have to, because that's when we were talking when Justine was talking about Weezer, I'm like, admittedly, I'm one of those people that,
Mhm.
being my age, I'm like, the first album I heard by them was that Green record. I'm like, Hash Pipe was
Yeah.
everywhere. I'm like, I was just
Yeah.
at the age. And then I had to kind of go back and I was like, oh, this is the Blue album. Oh, this Pinkerton. Oh,
Mhm.
oh, wow, I get this. And I've fallen off that Weezer train. So like that's good to know that maybe I have a little homework to do and like go back to what they're doing now. And Justine brought up like their Teal album they had too, where it was like they did the covers. And I was like, I had no idea Weezer even had a record that they did cover. I mean, I knew that Africa was everywhere. But
Yeah.
other than that, I had no idea. And I'm like, they were one of my favorite bands growing up too. It's like I don't know what happened, but I mean, I'm gonna definitely have to dive back into some Weezer then for sure.
Yeah, it's pretty diverse in what they do. I mean, it's all rock, it's all like pop rock.
Mhm.
You can categorize it that way, alternative rock, whatever. It's not that diverse, but it's diverse in the way that you're going to hear some stuff like they were doing in the 90s, and then you're going to hear some stuff that doesn't sound anything like it. And then they go full on pop sometimes.
Oh
So
wow.
but it's cool like to hear what Rivers Cuomo is an interesting individual. I I don't know. I follow him on social media, and he's very quirky, and but he's very experimental. Like he's always wanted to just try different things and see like what people like and what they don't. And so I kind of appreciate that about him, that he's willing to be like, well, this is Weezer, we are Weezer, so whatever we do is considered Weezer. He's not like Weezer sounds like only this.
Mhm.
Weezer
Yeah.
could be anything that those four guys put together. So
Oh, I love that. And I mean, I think we have to get into your incredible podcast, Something in the Wilderness. And it's such a unique podcast because I wasn't really that big into podcasts. And I know people are going to be like, oh, you guys have one. But
mhm.
before this, I mean, there were some podcasts I got into here and there if a favorite artist was on it. But what you do with yours and taking a song and whether it is Jack's Mannequin or something corporate or anything Andrew has done. And I think doing that deep dive into something, I think that's so unique and so cool. And it made me listen to yours a little bit where I was like,
Thank you.
this is really cool to learn. I mean, especially learning about there was one I really enjoyed when it was Punk Rock Princess.
Mhm.
And I was like, I loved this. High school, that was my song. That was everything. And to hear that kind of like the research and the time you take with it, I mean, that's something I respect so much because I love doing research on
Mhm.
everyone or anything, but that takes so much time and effort and you do it so well. And for you, what has been a favorite song that you have been able to do? And has there ever been one that was maybe you liked the song, but then diving deep into it, you were like, oh, I like this one a little bit more now?
Oh, good question, because there's so many actually. There was one early on. I'll start with the opposite for a
Yeah.
second. Early on, for some reason, so when I first started it, and I think it's probably because it was the first episode. The very first episode I did was I woke up in a car,
Mhm.
and I think because it's kind of like anything you do creative, you put so much time and effort and just work into that first one, that first time you do it. So I
Mhm.
think I actually burned myself out a little bit on that song for a while. I woke up in a car, and then I was
Mhm.
kind of sad, and I was like, well, I don't want to not like Andrew's music by doing this podcast. It can't be this way. So I don't think I changed anything going into the next one, but I think it was because I was so focused on that song for months. Whereas now I do about a song about every 2 weeks on a
Mhm.
rotation. So I don't have that long with it anymore. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
I still feel like I dive as deep into all the songs. I just don't have that long preparing for it. So I think that's why I realized that later on down the road. I was like, okay, I'm not ruining all his songs for me. That's not why I'm here.
Mhm.
So I did come back around to that song, of course, and it helps that he plays it every single time I see him in concert. That's
Mhm. Oh.
one of his go-tos. But to answer your question, a song that I really or that I enjoyed, but I enjoyed more. There's a couple pretty recently. I had a guest on, and actually, oh, we shared a guest. So Elizabeth Rogers was on
Mhm.
your show,
Yes.
and we talked about a song from the Glass Passenger called "Caves." And I had never really given that song a chance, honestly. It was it's a little bit different than his typical. It's toward the end of an album. It was just kind of like I wouldn't say it was a skip. It was just like if it came on, maybe I'd tune out or something. It was like, okay,
Mhm.
I like a little bit of this, but when he goes off and does this, I'm like, I don't know. But not only did so guests helped me understand a song better for one thing, but mainly they help me appreciate a song in a different way. They bring a new perspective, and that's what I love about guest episodes. So I've done a lot of episodes solo, and I've been fortunate to have a lot of people reaching out or that I've reached out to and that are like, yeah, I want to talk about a song too. So I've been getting a lot more of that this past year and a half, and it's episodes like that where it's like, wow, I'm able to see the song from a whole different perspective. I've also had 3 musician guests on that have covered Andrew songs. 2 of them specifically for the podcast, and one of them just had a cover out on YouTube, and that's kind of why I got in touch with her. But and that's been another cool experience to kind of see that this is how they interpret that song, and then we get to talk about it.
Mhm.
So those have been really special. And then yeah, I guess there's probably a lot of songs. All my guest episodes, I think I've found some new meanings and new appreciation for songs that I had. Oh, I'll go with one more. I'm sorry, I know this is a
Nope.
long-winded answer,
No,
but
no, go ahead. I love it.
I talk a lot.
Nice.
So there were 2 songs I didn't know at all by Andrew. They
Mhm.
were like bonus tracks on Jack's Mannequin album. So Last Straw Arizona and Out of It. And I did both of those, I think sometime last year, a little over a year ago. And so when each of those 2 people reached out to me and they're like, "This is my song," I was
Mhm.
like, "Well, you're gonna have to tell me about the song because I
Mhm.
don't know it. Like I could go find it on YouTube, like look it up and say, okay, that's that song, but I don't have the history and the nostalgia with it. So it's been really neat for them to for other people to bring their own perspectives, their own history with a song and explain that to me. And that can become part of my experience with the song now. So I just I think when we talk about music, like, and I know the 2 of you do this on your show as well, when we talk about music and what it means to us, I think it builds something. It builds something. I don't know what the word is for it, community
Mhm.
or what, but it's just builds our experience. I know that. So
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of in doing a podcast. It was like, you know what? Like, I'm here in New Jersey now, and it's hard when you're an adult to make friends. So it's like, I love music. I love that. But it's like, all right, how else can I connect with everybody else that maybe likes the same thing, or maybe they don't know somebody else that likes that and they feel alone, or whether it's music is what helps their mental health. That's great to have that. And what if I can connect with so many other people? And in the process, it's like, wow, like this person feels the same way I do. Like music really is that language for all of us. And it's so cool. It's so interesting.
yeah, that's the reason I felt compelled to create a podcast when I did is because it was that moment, like all of us during the height of the pandemic, where we were just craving connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I felt so disconnected from everything and everyone. And honestly, for a little while, and I think other people can relate to this, for a while, I was okay with that. I was like,
Mhm.
okay, a break is good, actually.
Yeah.
Like, it's
Yeah.
now I will say I was very fortunate. I have a wife and 2 kids at home. I cannot imagine what it was like for people who lived alone. I
Yeah.
honestly can't, and
Oh
it's like
yeah.
scary sounding and like, yeah, I just feel so bad for people who had to be alone during that time. I was fortunate. I had my family in the home with me for those couple of months where we really didn't leave. And so it was kind of comforting to just be like, you know what? We're just on break. We're just like doing, and we didn't know how long it would be, but it was like, then where it got weird was when to come back. So
Mhm.
when to connect again. How do we connect again? I didn't realize that would happen. And I heard people talking about it like on podcasts and other places. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think I'll have that problem, whatever. But like
Yeah.
eventually I did. Like I was like, okay, because it's weird now. It's like,
Mhm.
well, when you get sick or like you think you might be getting sick, like do you still see people? And because you want to be cautious, but like, and then people kind of form their own like unique connections with maybe others during the pandemic that you didn't have the time with them because you were away, you were doing your own thing with your
Yeah.
family.
Right.
and so that disconnect kind of stuck around. I didn't expect that. So, but that's one of the things the podcast has done for me, is it's kind of gotten me back out in the world with people, like you said,
Mhm.
Lisa, that you can find a connection with people through this music, through this podcast, that you may not have ever met these people before. In
Yeah.
almost every case of almost everyone I've ever had on the podcast, I didn't know them before. That's how I
Mhm.
met them.
Yeah.
And so I don't even know how many guests I've had now, but it's like, that's been helpful for me. And now when I go to the shows, I can be like, oh yeah, she was on my episode, they were on my
Mhm.
episode. But then, like, we also together kind of make connections to other people around us, which is what happened last night, actually. That was a lot of fun to kind of, I don't know, like I said, that communal feel. It was
Mhm.
it was pretty amazing.
Mm.
But that's, I'm like, if I go too long without socializing, I don't know, did either of you ever play The Sims?
Yes,
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
big
So
time.
remember when they had a need? I know it's still around, it's still a game,
Yeah.
but like,
Yeah.
when they have a need, they start like stomping their feet and like going like
Yeah.
like waving their arms, and it's
Yes.
Yeah.
funny. But that's kind of how I feel. Sometimes I envision myself that way when,
Mhm.
like, I don't have that connection, that socializing enough, and because life gets busy, like for all of us, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it gets tough because, like, you have your work, and you have your family to tend to, and you have these other either obligations or hobbies, even, or the podcast takes up a lot of my time,
Oh,
honestly. And
yeah,
then,
for
like, you go
sure.
out back out into the real world, and you're like, oh my gosh, like, I need to see people, I need to,
Mhm.
like, talk to people. So yeah, like, I love opportunities for this, so thank you so much for
Oh.
allowing me to come on here and do this, by
Oh,
the way.
absolutely. No, we were looking forward to it, and even when we had Bailey on, I was like, "Oh,"
Mhm.
and I listened to her episode and
Mhm.
knew her attachment to caves and everything, and I told her, I was like, "We're gonna have Steve on. We're gonna do it. We're gonna have it on." Um, so yeah, I'm so excited that it's here and we're doing it, and it is, but it and I do. I can't speak anyone else listening to this now. I mean, definitely we'll dive more into the podcast too for sure, but listen to because I do and it's one I'll have on and I do. I just appreciate what you do and the time you take with it
Thank
because you
you.
can really tell that it's just so well done and even like your intro and just everything. I'm like this is just it's such I don't want to use the word cute because it's like someone will be like, "Oh, it's cute." But I love the logo of it and just how it sounds. It's so soothing in the beginning with the piano, and it just I think it is. It just I hope one day we're at that point where I'm like listening to it and I'm like, wow, and because it is doing a podcast is a lot of work and it's a lot of time and it's, and even when I put it out, I'll be like, oh, I wish I would have done this or oh, I could have
Mhm.
changed this. Why did I? Oh, now
Oh
it's out
yeah.
there. Now it's out there. Well, like even one
Been
episode,
there.
I
Yep.
forgot to say that who the host was, right? And I know everyone says it's important. I'm listening to, I'm like, oh, I never said like but I'm your host, Lisa, and Justine's with me. And well, it's too late now. They probably, hopefully, it's episode 10, and they know it right now. But it is you put it out there, and it's just like, oh man, like I can't believe I did that. But you move on, and I'm like, they know it's fine. It's the little thing, but um, it is just listening to yours. I'm like, wow. I hope one day we're there where I'm like this, and I'm sure maybe you feel the same. You'll listen to it and you'll be like, "Oh, maybe I would have done this.
Yes.
Maybe could have done that." And it's a never ending thing. So I'm trying to always tell myself, you know what? You're doing the best you can. You're doing it like DIY, and you're not an expert. It's okay, but I do. I appreciate listening to yours. I feel like I'm
Thank you.
learning a little bit.
I really appreciate that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's odd. It's something maybe people wouldn't expect, maybe you wouldn't expect. But one thing I get really wrapped up in and I stress about is when I'm researching for the episode and it comes time to record, whether I'm with a guest or not. And it's such a weird thing to get stressed about, but I
Oh,
but I do. And that's like what the build up to the episode is kind of stressful for that, or that's
yeah.
that's one of the reasons it is. I'm so concerned when I'm talking about any song that I'm going to miss something. And I'm
Mhm.
like, well, I'll never be able to go back to that song again because the format of the podcast is song by song. And, like, I can't come back and be like, oh, and by the way, there was this thing I wanted to talk about with the song The Resolution that we talked about last episode. So
Mhm.
I that would just feel weird to me. So it's like, what, like you said, once it's out there, it's like, oh shoot, I forgot that thing I was gonna do, and that
Mhm.
thing I was gonna say. I honestly, I do notes. I have notes in front of me when I do my podcast. I don't think that's any secret. I think a lot of podcasts just, yeah, do that. But you
Yep.
miss things, like, because you get talking, and
Yeah.
that's great when like the conversation is
Mhm.
so natural that like, oh my gosh, I didn't even look at a half page of my notes.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, it's just a weird thing to get wrapped up in, like, oh my gosh, I forgot to talk about this one thing, or I forgot to say this one thing.
Yeah.
And then you stress about the audio. You're like, oh my
Oh.
gosh, does it sound okay? And
Mhm.
things like that. So yeah, it's just I get wrapped up in the details, and so my wife would tell anyone it like she sees me put all this time into it and get so worked up about it that she knows she's like she's out with a friend right now. She knows just like I'm just gonna go do this other thing while you do your podcast
Yeah.
thing.
That is, yeah, that's kind of the same thing here too, where it's I'll be even tonight, like our episodes come out Tuesday. So I'm like,
Hmm.
I know I edited it. I know it sounds okay. I'll
Hmm.
listen to it with headphones on. I listen to it all different in the car, just to like, how does it sound? Is it okay? And I know it's okay, but I know after we're done here, before I go to bed, I'm gonna like one more time. Is it okay? And
Yeah.
it just and sometimes it's like, you know what? I I enjoy doing it. I know you enjoy I think anyone that does a podcast enjoys it. And
Hmm.
I just want to keep it like that too. I have to like bring myself and be like, you know what? You have to just enjoy it. If you're not
Yep.
enjoying it or having fun with it, then what's the point?
Right.
And someone out there isn't even going to see those little imperfections either. They're not going to notice whatever it is that I'm noticing. They're going to think, "Oh, that's really good. I
That's
like
what it's
that."
supposed to sound like. Yeah. That's what it was supposed to happen. So
Mhm.
um
Exactly.
yeah, I did a lot of research online. Like I said, I did a lot of like Reddit. I did a lot of Reddit boards, like podcasting boards and things like that. And I had some really good advice. There was some really good advice out there to find, and people, there's a lot of people that were helpful. And one thing I was told is that content is king. If you, if you put something out there that someone's going to want to listen to, then it'll be fine. Like if someone out there wants to listen, cool. And so I've never been too concerned about if I have, one listener or
Mhm.
500 or whatever.
Same.
So it's like if there's someone out there enjoying this, if there's someone out there getting something out of this, because that's what I set out to do. This is helping me. And if anybody feels like they're getting a little bit more of a connection to another person or people or music, then then I'm doing something right. Right. So that's,
Mhm.
I gotta remind myself of that sometimes and not get so wrapped up in the details. So I struggle with that though. I put so much pressure on myself to be like, oh my gosh, like kind of like exactly what you said, so.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
and even before like, I'll tell Justine, even before guests come on, and I'm so excited to have anybody come on. But then when the day comes and it's like an hour before, and then it's like, okay, I'm getting a little nervous about it. Like and
Mhm.
again, because you never met them and you don't know.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes that can be difficult. But then when I find once you're in and everybody is in the room and everything's working too, you're like, oh, like what was I worried about? This is a fun good thing. Um, and that's why I love it, because we are just talking music and it's like we can all connect and we've never met each other and it's
Mhm.
great to have that. So it is. I love doing it. So
Mhm.
I
That's
always have
good.
to I have to
It's
keep it
important.
that way too, because that is so
Definitely.
important.
Yeah, I feel like if I ever stopped liking it, I'm not going to do it.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
what it's that's this is the point, is to enjoy it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
So what is a song you haven't done yet on the podcast that you want to?
Ooh, well, there's a lot actually. So I've only covered one song on the brand new album, which is kind of a weird thing to do considering I do a music podcast about this musician and he just released a new album. But the way I decided to approach it is we're just going to talk a little bit with every guest I have. We're just going to be like, talk about their favorite songs or like the new album, the tour, and things like that, just a little bit here and there. So there's not been one episode completely focused on the new album, but there are some great songs on the new album I'm looking forward to tackling. And I got a chance to talk to Andrew about one of those songs, Andrew McMahon himself, back in January
That's
about
so
one of those
cool.
songs. Yeah, it was one of the coolest things that's honestly ever happened to me in my life. And I've told my parents that, I've told my wife, I've told my kids, like, and everybody's like, yeah, that is really cool. Like your favorite
Oh,
musician was like, yeah, I'll be on your podcast. And you guys know what it's like because you've had like
oh,
really great musicians that you're fans of on your podcast. It's like it's like, wow, they like care about what we're doing and want to talk about
Exactly.
it. So, but to go back to your question, besides the new album, um, there's what is a really good one? So there's an album that I feel like is so underappreciated, and you may be familiar with it. Something Corporate's North,
oh, yes.
and I've covered about half of the album, but in my opinion, that album is just about perfection,
Hmm.
and I'm looking forward to covering more songs off that album. So I did one recently and I still have, I think, 5 more to do. I try to space them out, honestly. So I try to like look at, well, I don't want to do too many songs from one album in a row or like 2 in a
Yeah.
row. If I haven't done a something corporate song in a while, I gotta make sure I cover them. I think it has been. I think we've done one something corporate song, maybe 2 in this whole 2023, which is, but I've kind of been going with like what people that write in want to talk about for the most part, and we kind of go back and forth, and so I kind of leave it a lot of that to the guest. They give me a few songs, and then I'll like say, well, here's what I'm thinking, and but yeah, so I'm looking forward to getting back to North by Something Corporate because that album there's such special memories attached. And one of my favorite songs of all time, which I have covered by him, is As You Sleep.
Hmm.
And but I'm looking forward to like Ruthless.
Yes. Oh,
And yeah, that's such a
yeah.
good song. And
Yes.
let's see. Uh I Won't Make You would be a cool one. That's like a slow ballad,
Yeah.
actually written by another guy that was in the band. So, yeah, because there's songs by Something Corporate that weren't even written by Andrew, but I still cover them because he's obviously on the track and had to do
Hmm.
with it. So, yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to some of those.
Yeah, I think North is a very underrated record. I
Mhm.
think a lot of people, even when we were doing those 20-year things and talking about them, a lot of people I think maybe forgot it came out that year or just for whatever reason, but I love North. I think that record is so good. And I hope maybe one day we'll get a tour or something of celebrating that.
I know because it's been 20
Oh,
years this year.
yes.
Would have been the right
Oh,
time. But I don't expect him to go back to an older album on a year he's promoting a new one. But
Yeah.
exactly. That's at the timing of that. I'm like, it's not going to happen.
no.
It's the same kind of thing with Fall Out Boy and Take This to Your Grave. I'm like, they're promoting this new record.
Hmm.
They're not going to do it, and that's okay. But we can appreciate that. I can't believe that was 20 years ago.
It's
Wow.
unbelievable. Yeah. He played a song off of that album last night called 21 and Invincible, which is
Mhm.
Mhm.
just a jam.
Yes.
And he said his friend suggested maybe he ought to change it to 41 and Invisible. That was one of the jokes he cracked last night because it's like, yeah, because he's gonna be 41 in September. And it's funny when I think he realizes that the funny nature of the fact that he's singing about being 21 when
Mhm.
obviously he's not anymore. But it's a moment in time, like all these songs that we
Mhm.
love,
Yeah.
right? It captured a moment in time, and we get to return to that for like 3.5 minutes or whatever. So I still love when he does that song.
And I mean, kind of to go in, this kind of just lumps into that. I know you touched on it a little bit, but I can imagine having Andrew McMahon on your podcast. I mean, I think about we all have our little bucket lists. Like Justine and I have
Mhm.
talked about, like
Yeah.
maybe one day if we had this person or that person, like
Mhm.
that would be crazy. Thankful for anyone, but just you have those people. And I guess I don't know how do you even prepare for something like that? Because I mean, even us, we've had
Yeah.
one of our favorites and how we met Anthony Green of Circa Survive when he
Mhm.
listened to our
Yeah,
podcast and shared it. And
it's
I remember
awesome.
We
that
still talk about it to this
that
day.
Yeah, that was so cool.
that feeling was like, oh my gosh, like I
Yeah.
never would have thought that. And just that alone was like, oh my gosh,
Mhm.
like they heard what we felt about them and how their music has impacted us. But going into that and just doing that and now looking back on that, I mean, obviously amazing, but how
Mhm.
was that in that that day of recording?
Well, I think the craziest thing about when you said, like, how do you prepare for that? The craziest thing about
Yeah,
that is it got me thinking right away, like, how did I actually
yeah,
prepared for it just like any other episode. And it's not to say I didn't stress out, and it's not to say I wasn't
mhm,
totally excited, and
yeah,
there was all of those emotions. But
mhm.
I really tried to approach the planning, preparation, research part of it the same way. Like, I tried to find everything about the song, everything I knew. They shared the song with me early because the song we coordinated, so the song was coming out the same day as my podcast episode was releasing about the song.
Oh, wow.
So I was part of the promotion for the song, which was
That's so
just
cool.
mind blowing, like incredible. Like, they sent me the song weeks in advance, like a month in advance. And then they sent me another song that hadn't come out yet. And was like, oh, and he's like, and here's another one. His manager was like, and here's another one if you want, check that out. And because that'll be out by the time you guys talk too. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, like, they're sharing music with me so that I could prepare. Like, I'm not a music journalist in any
Mhm.
sense of the word, and they
Right.
knew that. They know that,
Yeah.
right? But they're
Mhm,
like, yeah, and I think they appreciated the fact that I approached this as a fan. So,
mhm,
and
Yeah.
that's what I tried to do. I was like, I'm gonna have my fanboy moment. Don't get me wrong, and I did.
mhm.
I totally like I was like, Andrew, I love you. Like, I think I even said that. Like, I didn't mean to, but I was like, I love your music. I love you. And I was like, but so I totally did that. Um, but I did. I approached it like I do with all my guests, and I was like, I'm gonna put down notes. I'm gonna learn everything I
Mhm.
can. I'm gonna try to be as professional as possible, but also personable,
Yeah.
and as much as I can. But I'm gonna approach it as a fan first. So, I'm not just like coming and asking the standard questions that would come from a journalist who has an assignment that they have to do. I,
Right.
I'm a guy, I really am interested. I really want to know this. And I know a lot of music journalists are, not to down them, like,
Right.
legitimately
Yeah.
interested in their subject. But I just, I'm coming at this from, like, I've been listening to this guy, his music. I've been relating to his lyrics
Mhm.
personally, deeply for, over 20 years at this point. And I'm like, and now I get to ask him about those lyrics and how he writes, and what it's like to be in the studio with the other people that he works with. And I just came up with questions that I was interested in, and again, kind of followed the the pattern of what I do with all the songs. Like, let's talk about the sound of it. Let's talk about lyrics. Let's talk about the songwriting.
Yeah.
We did all that just like I would with, like, just another fan, which was so cool. And then another thing I promised myself, because if I didn't put this cap myself, I could have talked to him all day, forever.
Mhm.
It was so cool. So he got on, and when you get onto a Zoom like we just did a little while ago,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh, hey, how you doing?
Yeah.
Introduce, it was just like that. Like, he was so personable. He's like,
Uh,
what's up, man? Like, how you doing? Like, and we went through the whole, like, let's get our audio. Like, how does this sound? That sounds good. Yep, that sounds good. Like, it was just so, like, low key. And then he said something like, I said, I think I got an hour, right? I think I didn't know, because I didn't know
yeah.
how long we had. And he's like, you got me as long as you want me. It's cool, man. And I was like, okay. But I did. I like planned for exactly an hour. I really did.
Mhm.
And the episode ended up being about 54 minutes because I edited, like, just some little things out that didn't feel like they belonged or whatever.
Mhm.
But yeah, so I kept it. I was very strict on myself. I didn't set an alarm, but I was watching my clock on my computer, and I was like, okay, I think we started at 4, and I was like, it's 5 o'clock. Like, I was like, thank you so much, Andrew. It was great. Loved talking to you forever, but take care. Like, and he was like, all right, cool. Like, but I was proud of myself because I cut myself off. I was like,
Yeah.
Wherever we're at, we're gonna stop at an hour because I want to be respectful and
Right.
hope that he remembers that.
Right.
And and one day he's like, yeah, that guy really respected my time, and, like, I would go back on his podcast. So
Mhm.
um
Yeah.
I I I kind of I had to set some ground rules, and where that fan first thing came from, that was actually my wife. She was the one that was like, you're a fan first. Like you're just a fan that wants to talk to your favorite artist. Remember that when you go into it. And I was like, that was great advice. So
I know a lot of people that work that some that whether they do PR or whatever they do music wise, and they've always said one of the best ways they've connected with bands or fans they've liked and they've gotten positions they have is because they were a fan first, and they are always approached of I'm a fan of this, I like this, this
mm-hmm.
is what I enjoy,
Important.
and that's how they've gotten to where they're at, and I think that's something I've always wanted to do too. Is like I'm a fan of music first and foremost. I mean, and that's what it is. And kind of going back to the whole if only one person is listening, it doesn't matter listener count. I mean, me, that's the same thing. Like I'm not like, oh, how many followers do we have? How many this
Yeah.
or how many likes do I get? No, like I just want to do it and put it out there. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's just I can't that's just so wonderful that happened to you and that was able to happen. And that's uh I
It's
It
can't
so
was
imagine.
What's crazy is like when I started this thing in August of 2020 was the first episode, and I started
Yeah,
planning for it. Like I said, at the height of the pandemic, I was sitting on my couch watching Andrew McMahon live streams in March, April 2020. Like, I
yeah.
should do a podcast about this guy's music because it's just so amazing. And so I launched it in August 2020, and I was like, oh, how cool would that be? I said to myself, I probably said to my wife, is like maybe one day, like I would get Andrew on the podcast. How cool would that be? I didn't expect that to happen so soon. Like
Mhm.
I was I was not mentally sorry, I was
No,
not
you're good.
mentally prepared to like handle that at that moment because I feel like I needed to get to a certain level or something, which is just kind
Mhm.
of goofy to think about, right? Like
Sure.
what are we doing? Like you
Yeah.
said, we're just having fun. We're having
Yeah.
fun doing a
yeah.
podcast, we're connecting with others, we're putting
Yeah.
something out there for people to enjoy. And I don't know what I was expecting to get to or something, but I just didn't expect that to happen so quick. So I was like, oh my gosh. So like, fortunately, I did have about a month to kind of mentally prepare too. And it was, and there were some moments like some emails and phone calls ahead of time that were actually more nerve wracking. By the time we got to the actual Zoom recording, it was like, okay, I can do this, and that was a really good way to. It was nice that I had the time. I don't know that everybody would get that same experience, but I was just fortunate with the time, the way it all worked out, that I was able to kind of prepare myself for it, I guess.
Oh, absolutely.
We're definitely curious. How do you balance both your home life and the podcast? Because we definitely deal with trying to figure that out. So
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry I won't have any words of advice for you because it's tough.
Yeah.
Uh, it's like I feel like I spend so much time on this, this little hobby of mine, and it's but you gotta, I don't want to put this again, it's about enjoying it, and if I'm not enjoying it, I'm not going to do it. So it's a lot of
Mhm.
yeah.
work, but to balance, I've got to really find times. There was a moment in time where I had never postponed or canceled on a guest before, and I had to. I was like, you know what? Family comes first.
Yeah.
We are,
Yeah.
this is what's going on right now. And I'll give you another example. Actually, this was to me, it doesn't sound so dramatic when I tell the story, but it was heartbreaking to me. I was on a Zoom call. It was actually last week. It was last weekend. I was on a Zoom call having a great conversation, had a good recording, put the episode out. But anyway, I had told my daughter, so my oldest was gone somewhere, and my wife was gone somewhere, and I told my youngest, who's 9, that hey, dad's recording, so just try to be quiet, like outside the door, like it's, you can watch TV or do whatever. But I think she was playing music. That's what she was doing right before I was recording, and I was like, hey, if you're gonna play music, just don't play it in the hallway. And she was like, okay. And we've had those conversations before. Like I'm real particular about the audio, and
Mhm.
Yeah.
but I felt so bad because when I finished, I went down, and it was a lot longer conversation than I anticipated. It was like it ended up being about an hour and a half, and I was telling my wife and kids it's only going to be an hour, I swear, and then
Oh.
it's an hour and a half almost always.
Yep.
And I go down, and she's like, my friend asked me to come over, but they were leaving at 6:30, and I knew I couldn't knock on the door, so and I
Oh,
I almost start crying. I
Yeah.
was
oh
like,
no.
I was like, I never want my daughters to feel like they can't come and talk to me. Like they can't just
Yeah.
come in and be like, and it sounds so maybe trivial to a lot of people, but it wasn't about her hanging out with her friend. They're
Yeah.
very fortunate. They get to do a lot of cool things. But I felt bad that my daughter's sitting down there and she didn't like she thought that she'd get in trouble if she interrupted my podcast. And I'm like, honey, no.
Mhm.
And yeah, so I was heartbroken. And I told my wife about it afterward. And I was like, and I talked to her. We had a conversation. I was like, honey, you can knock on the door anytime.
Mhm.
You're not gonna bother, you're not in trouble. I can just pause and it's fine, you know. And so I tell my guests too, like some people are apologetic with, oh, I might get interrupted by a pet or a kid. I'm like, it's totally cool. We are doing this as a hobby. We're doing it from home for
Mhm.
fun, like family first. So, but yeah, it it feels like it's something I said that, you know, made her think she couldn't come in here, and that broke my heart. So I have to remind myself that like I can't always be doing this. Like there are so
Mhm.
much more important things going on right in front of me that I have to be there for. I don't miss my kids' activities. You
Mhm.
know, we try to spend some quality time together at least a few times a week. We try to eat meals together. I try to record at night when they're not around. And in fact, they're at camp right now, overnight camp, which is why I knew I had this night open. I was like, when you sent me dates, I was like, oh, perfect. Like
Yes.
I can make that work because I'm not going to be pulled away from anything. My wife had plans and the kids are gone, but I almost always record and they're around, but usually they're getting ready for bed or doing something else fun that they do and it works out. But yeah, so it's just I've got to remind myself sometimes what's truly important, and that this is just a hobby, and I've got to you know, it's like a job. This is not a job,
Mhm.
but it works the same. My
Yeah.
work is not my life. I have a day job like most people, and I, you know, I separate it. It's like I'm doing my work over here, and now it's family time, and
Mhm.
that is not going to override my family time because if we let work override our family time and our lives and run over us, then what are we even here for? Like we're here to just like be with others, be with people, and be ourselves, and do the things, you know, that make us happy. And we've got to find, so whether it's podcasting or you know, being with your family or like going to concerts or going to sport events or like just, you know, bike riding or jogging or whatever makes you happy, you gotta make time for that, but also make time for the people that are important to you. It's really hard. I'm sorry I don't have any sage words of
No.
advice though.
Yeah.
Like how do you
You
balance? I don't know. I
you put
just
it wonderfully, honestly.
Yeah.
Like,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Oh no, that is, and I can't I can't imagine how tough that is because it's like you said, there is even a tough balance for me where if I plan, okay, we're gonna record or
Hmm.
we're gonna now maybe a guest needs to record on a Saturday, but now, okay, well, I don't want to put out, where I record and my fiance wants to sometimes do certain things like, oh, I can't put him out and I've got to,
Hmm.
there's all of that and I don't even have little kids to worry about and it can
Hmm.
be very tough. So I can't imagine. So
Hmm.
that is but I think you did say it perfectly how we're all trying to figure it out too. We're
Hmm.
Mhm.
in every way, in every
Yeah.
way. And I
Yeah.
guess go ahead.
So I don't get worked up or anything. I don't mind
Yeah.
when someone has to cancel or postpone. I'm like, I get it.
Same.
Like we're here
Mhm.
for a lot of things, and this is just one of those things. So we've gotta figure out how to do it all. It's our
Mhm.
culture is it's just so you know, more and more, and I know this comes from technology and everything, but our culture is just more like we're getting more thrown at us all the time. It's just like more,
Mhm.
more, 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 more. Whether we're doing more, we're seeing more, we're experiencing more, we're hearing more information is being pushed at us, like from all directions. It's like it's overstimulating, and it's
Yeah.
hard to like find yourself in that mix sometimes. But you've got to try to find a way to ground yourself and figure out, you know, who am I? Who am I within all of this around me? who do I want to be and who's important to me is, in my opinion, so important.
Oh, it is. I love that you said that, and I think someone else hearing that too, it'll really really hit home because I think it's such a good reminder for us all too. And I guess if someone wanted listening to this and they're stepping into the podcast world and they're maybe listening to this, like, hey, I have an idea.
Mhm.
What do you have any advice for anyone that would like to start a podcast, whether they're hearing us or they hear you, or um, what in any challenges that you've kind of faced that you've been able to learn from as you're going along in your podcast journey?
I would say do a lot of planning and research before you even launch, and that was one of the pieces of advice that someone told me on Reddit, on one of those Reddit threads,
Yeah.
and I appreciate this. So, like, I had the idea months before I even, I put together, um, all the social medias and the
Yeah.
hosting, and I found somebody to create that artwork for me, which was
Oh,
actually awesome because that was just somebody from the Andrew fan group that she made these awesome designs out of Andrew McMahon lyrics. Her name's Amanda, and she's After the Fire Designs.
okay.
And I just asked her, would you be able to, so I like what you did over here with this piece of art. Would you be able
Yeah.
to do something like that? And how do we go about that? And she was so kind and generous about it. And she was like, oh, totally, I would do that for you. Sure. And I don't even know her. I didn't even know her.
Hmm.
I still don't personally know her, but like we've interacted on, through social media and chatting and things. And she was so kind to do that. So like finding resources like other people who have done it and doing the research before launch and really planning it out. I someone gave me this like podcasting planning guide, which is really and so if anybody ever wants to email me for it, it's not something I created. I can't take credit for that, but someone else created it and gave it away for free. And I was like, this is awesome. I actually made notes on it in the
Hmm.
planning process. But so that's, just about the beginning, but then just know that when you do a podcast, anybody listening that's interested, it's a lot of work. I had
Mhm.
my wife's good friend was maybe thinking about doing a podcast, and she might still be thinking about it.
Yeah.
And so what I told her is I was like, be prepared to do, it's a lot of time. It's a big time commitment because she's a parent too, like I am. And just be prepared that you might have to give up other hobbies, which I have. I've given up other hobbies that I enjoy to do this. And with that balance piece, going back to that balance that Justine asked me about, I've had to sometimes pull back from this and say, hey, I don't want to forget about that other thing that I love,
Hmm.
like taking a 10-mile bike ride or getting outside and just being in the sunshine and just doing something outside. Because a lot of podcasting is indoors, of
Mhm.
course.
Hmm.
So not much outdoors there. And so just knowing that it's such a time commitment and being prepared to do a little bit of work for a lot of reward, in my opinion. So it's work, but it has a reward if you love it. So that's what I would tell someone.
I love that. That. It's very very true. I can say like that's, and I like what you said too about not forgetting about those things because I love to draw. I love art, and
Mhm.
sometimes I'm like, okay, I know we got to do this. I know we have to plan for this, and I have this going on. But you know what? I really want to draw today. I really want to take that
Mhm.
hour or two and go do that. Or I don't want to stop. Maybe go on that walk with my fiance or go to the park. Because I'm like, oh, you know what? We've got this going on. I want to focus on this, and it's. I think that's so even for us to hear. I think that's so important to have that
Definitely.
out there for sure. Because I know that's our big thing too. Is we
Mhm.
always wanna keep it this is great, and this is our hobby, and we love it, but, so when Justine says, "I can't record today, I have to
Mhm.
go do something else." Go do that, that's
Yeah.
fine, I want you to go do that and enjoy that.
Hmm. I appreciate the message the two of you are putting out in the podcast world.
Mhm.
I appreciate this idea that, again, that there is a connection that we're looking for, and music is something that can connect us and help us. And for a lot of us, like myself included, it's therapy.
Mhm.
It's this beautiful, wonderful thing that, again, like we talked about with your question, like I
Yeah.
discovered at a young age how special it was to me, and it's kind of evolved into this whole part of my life. I'm not a musician. I never have been able to play an instrument, but so I don't make any music, of course, but just to have that soothing piece to, and again, like it's kind of like that old, like the old, when you're looking up at the stars and knowing that someone that you love is looking at the same star, it's like I'm listening to a song that someone else in the world feels the same way about. And that's the connection with this music, and it helps.
And I think I know, sorry, Justine, I'm gonna jump around because I love what you just said,
It's
and
okay.
I think that kind of brought us to our next kind of thing of how for music, how is music for you? And you said it's like therapy. How
Mhm.
has music made a positive impact in your life with your mental health? How has that been able to do that?
It's Music is very soothing to my soul, like a lot of us. I'm sure a lot of people would say that, but it's hard to explain. I've met a lot more people recently, I'll put it that way, that feel that way. But growing up, I had a couple of friends who were as passionate music listeners as I am, and I still have some of those friends, fortunately. Awesome people. But some of my friends growing up just weren't into music. They're like, yeah, that's cool. Like, I like music and stuff, but like they didn't seem to have that deeper connection and want to talk
Mhm.
about it and want to just, dig it apart and like talk about lyrics and go to shows um and things like that. So it's been this constant in my life, I'll say, but it's evolved. The feelings have evolved from like a kid sitting next to a boombox listening to a tape with his friend or his brother to like this bigger picture of looking at the world, kind of like I just described it, just like wow, what music does for us. And I just love the not every live show is created equally. I went to a pretty amazing one last night that I mentioned, and
Mhm.
some of them are amazing and some of them are just kind of fine. But usually there's at least one moment in a concert, even if it's just a concert that I kind of feel like meh afterward, because sometimes there are
Mhm.
and that I go to. But usually there's a point where I feel like I don't know that like I felt it in my chest last night. It was like chills in my chest
Mhm.
a couple of times, and it was like, wow, like if I could just find a way to feel this way at home. So it's, when I went to my first concert many, many years ago. I mentioned Aerosmith earlier. That was actually my first concert. Was Aerosmith in the early
That's my
90s.
first concert too. How wild
Oh,
is
was it?
that?
I
Yeah.
think I may have you mentioned that on the podcast? I feel like I may have heard that. Did you say that before? I don't know.
I might
But
have mentioned it before, but yeah.
okay, that is a crazy coincidence. So yeah, that's funny. So yeah, so from the time I went with my uncles because I was really young, and I was like, this is so cool, like seeing the because at the time it was like MTV was the thing, you
Mhm.
see on TV, you know what the artists look like, but you don't feel that pulse in your chest until you're in a concert. And we were in the nosebleeds, don't get me wrong. Like we were not down front or anything. I was way up in this arena, but it was still like wow. And then I saw and the second band I saw was Nine Inch Nails, which
Oh.
complete 180, like because I liked all the rock music,
Yeah.
um but Nine Inch Nails like even like pulled me further, and it was like, oh my
Mhm.
gosh, like I felt that like the whole that was like electrifying when I saw Nine Inch Nails. I
Mhm.
was like, oh my gosh,
Mhm.
this is where I want to be forever. I want to be in a concert. So there was a period of time when we first had kids where it was really hard to get out to a concert. So it was really just these last few years I've been getting more into it. And so that's kind of like what this has evolved into. So I really enjoy music at home with my family. My kids love music, which is awesome. And it's awesome that they have their own tastes, and some of them cross over with mine, some of them don't. Fine by me. But I love that my kids love music. And so now I get to
Mhm.
like, I feel like my wife and I have helped pass that down to our kids about here is this amazing thing, and you can pick and choose what you like and leave behind what you don't. And then you can go out and experience it live with other people and sing along. And yeah, they actually watched. So Andrew McMahon or Hulu live streamed the Bonnaroo concerts over the weekend, and so I got to catch that on Saturday, and they actually watched part of it with me, which was, and they've done that before too. But like, it was cool because my oldest is kind of becoming like getting into it, like some teenage stuff, and like, oh, what dad likes isn't cool. But it was so exciting to me because she kind of came back around for that moment at least. Sometimes I see it, I see the glimpse, and I'm like, oh my gosh, she was enjoying it. She's like, oh, I like that song. What's High Dive? That's a cool song. Why didn't you introduce that one to me? And like, she heard me sing it. Like, I watch live streams sometimes, like I'm at a concert. I'm like, I may be sitting on the couch, but I'm kind of like on the edge of my seat, literally. And I'm like rocking and singing along, and they see that, and they're like, oh, that's interesting. Like, and sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, dad. But sometimes it's like, yeah, I like that. That's cool. And my wife told me while we were at the concert yesterday, she's like, yeah, our youngest was singing along to A Little Disaster the other day when she was kind of reviewing the album before the show. And she was like, yeah, I did not think that was one that would pop out at her as like a 9-year-old, but she was it was like kind of a newer ballad. And and there are messages, I will say there's messages of drug use in that song, which I feel a little guilty about, but I'm like, Andrew, but yeah, he sings about all kinds of things, like all the musicians. But yeah, they're kind of hearing that stuff now in music. So that's the kind of hard thing. It's like, oh, I don't know. I don't want to sanitize too much because I really want them to experience the music they love. But yeah, we gotta be a little careful about what kind of messages we're sending the kids to. It's a battle, especially when they get to be like, have middle school, and they're like, oh, I really like this because I don't care about the swearing, and I don't care about the what they're saying. I just love the music. And I'm like, I get it, because I was listening to, again, Nine Inch Nails, Downward Spiral in 1993, and my parents would not have approved if they heard that album. So
well, I know Justine and I are both, we were talking about Nine Inch Nails in our part 1 in the 90s, and how
nice.
I remember being younger, and my first introduction was the video for Closer. And like, did I have any business watching that video late at night? I mean, I'm 37 now, so what was I? God, I'm young. There was no business watching that. And even getting
I was 15, so you probably would have been about 9 or 10.
Yeah, which but something about that in that music, and whether it was that or Third Eye Blind, and their, when they would sing, Semi-Charmed Life, the tones in that, I had no idea. I was just jumping up and down.
I had no idea what that song was about for a while. Yeah.
No, but
I was so naive.
You're a kid, so it's always interesting, like, and getting into that music, and it's when you were younger and you had no idea, you're just, oh, it's nice. And then as you get older, you're like, what we were talking about the other day, like, what were we listening to? Like no business. But I followed Nine Inch Nails, and I know we were talking all about like what a great band they are, and just how we've grown with them, but no business being our ages listening to that and even knowing what was going on. But it just, when music grabs you, it grabs you, and it's great. So that's what's awesome about it.
Yeah. It's true. Sometimes it's not always about the lyrics either. Sometimes it is for me. I'm a lyrics person, but it's not always about the lyrics. Sometimes it's just about the way it makes you feel, and sometimes it is those like Closer, like we all know the main lyrics, but sometimes it's just the feeling you get when you hear that. It's like I said, it kind of if it hits you in your chest, right? Then it's just like, oh my gosh, that's a feeling I want to keep having.
Oh, for sure. It is. But again, those lyrics, no business, not even in my mind. But it was the sound of it. But it's like, no, of course
even
not.
though MTV was muting it as much as they had to at the time, but only as much as they had to.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But other than music, what is something that you turn to on a stressful or bad mental health day?
I mentioned it earlier. I like to get outside, and I don't do it often enough, to be honest, but it was actually a 20-mile bike ride a couple weeks ago. And that's rare, by the way. That's probably the second time in my life I've ever done that. But I don't know. I was just feeling a certain way, and I had the time because all my wife and kids had things to do on their own. So I was like, I'm just gonna get on a bike, and there's a town that's 10 miles down our bike path. It has a couple breweries and just cool places to hang out. And I was like, and I usually, if I'm on a bike ride or a long walk, I need a destination. I need like somewhere to end up, you know. And so like getting on my bike, which again, it's too rare. I need to do that more often when the weather's nice. But taking a walk, there was a couple weeks ago where my whole family just kind of, I wouldn't say we were at each other's throats. That wouldn't be fair to say. It was more like there was there's a project that my kids are working on for something they're involved with, and we were all just really stressed about it. And so it kind of got a little snippy between all of us, myself included. I was just getting a little, I was like, I just need to walk away for a little while. And I have the good fortune and the support of my family to understand that sometimes I need that. So fortunately, it was a nice night. I'm not the kind of person who gets in the car and takes off or anything like that. So I just like walked the circle around the neighborhood, and I was like, oh, and I ended up talking to my neighbor who I haven't talked to, honestly, like had a good conversation with in years. Cause again, the whole weirdness of the pandemic and just the way that, people kind of separated and did their own thing for a while. And then it was kind of weird to come back to like, okay, now I haven't talked to him in like
Right.
2.5 years. Like, what do we talk about now? But it was really nice. Like he just kind of stopped me and started talking to me. I was like, we can just have conversations with our neighbors. Like, this is
Yeah.
cool. And it kind of like brought me down to earth, back down to earth a little bit. And it's like I could go in the house and be like, again, this stuff that we get so worked up about, all these projects and things we're trying to accomplish and stuff coming at us. It's not as important as sometimes we treat it. It's just kind of like you've got to step outside yourself for a little while and get grounded. So whether that's taking a walk, getting on a bike, maybe you exercise in your house, and it doesn't have to be exercising at all. Actually, I like to read, and I don't do that often enough either. I always have a book by my bedside, but it usually stays unopened for weeks at a time. But sometimes that's how I unwind. And I will admit, um, I wouldn't say it's unhealthy at this point, but I do watch a lot of TV. So that's a way I unwind at night. I don't think I do it overboard, but I do like I love watching, if I'm watching if I'm in the middle of an hour long show, I don't get too many opportunities to do what we call binge watching, but I do like to watch one episode a night and just like, okay, I can watch my episode and I can go to bed. And that kind of helps me unwind along with, reading sometimes and things like that. So those are kind of my tools to just kind of decompress after a day. And I'll tell you what, but sometimes it's just like laying down. Like sometimes I just gotta, if I'm not even, sometimes you get so overwhelmed by the world and you're just like, maybe I'm not even tired, like physically tired, but like mentally tired.
Mm-hmm.
I just have to lay down and close my eyes sometimes, and that helps. And it's like if I have a half hour to an hour to do that in the middle of the day, and I will admit, most of us don't have that luxury to just
Right.
lay down in the middle of the day, right? But if
Mm-hmm.
I can get off of work and I can go lay in my bed or my couch and do that, that really helps me. Even if it's for 10 minutes, sometimes it does help me. But yeah, so those are some of the things that I do that kind of help decompress or like just kind of I I try not to shove the problems away or anything, but sometimes you do need to walk away from it and just get your mind on something else and then come back to the problem to help find the solution. And I'm not anywhere near perfect at it. I want to get better, but but yeah, like all of us, I'm just trying. So
No,
Definitely.
no, I know. Justine is really great when she's really brought to the podcast for me and let me see that in our own world of mental health and what it is that our environment contributes so much to that. Like if we're going through, whether it was the pandemic or a job loss or just a frustrating situation at home or anything, and how, yes, maybe someone doesn't have a mental illness, but you what's around you and what's going on definitely
Mm.
contributes. And if you can find things like you have, or like so many others have shared, and that's what I love too, is everybody has said something different.
Mhm.
Whether it was exercising, some have said art, some
Hmm.
have said, I know Bailey, her photography and how she got back
Hmm.
into that too. And Bailey's story was just so incredible to
Yeah.
hear, and really just hit home with all of that. And that's what I think is so great. And I think, maybe, um, I know for some of our conversation, I'll take about whatever you've said too. I've been taking a little bit, like when I'm having a day, like, oh, well, I heard this, and, oh,
Hmm.
Steve said this, or Zach said this, Bailey said this, and Cody said
Hmm.
this. And I think it lets other people know they're not alone. So that's really
Mhm.
great.
Yeah. Yeah. No, none of us are perfect, and
No.
we're all like, you made a good point there. Like, we may not, maybe we do, maybe we don't have a mental illness, diagnosed.
Yeah.
But whether we do or not, we're all struggling with things. We
Mhm.
all have our personal struggles, family struggles, work struggles. Um, we don't we never know someone else completely. We can try, and I think we should attempt to, as much as possible, get to know the people we care about, people we want to get to know, the people we love, as much as possible. But you can never know what's inside of a person completely. But you can try to sympathize and empathize and understand. And I try, again, I'm not perfect, but I try to approach meeting people that way. Like, I don't know their struggle. And so I try not to judge, and you've got to check yourself sometimes. You got to, like, what, like,
Mhm.
hey, I'm coming from one perspective, and I only, know that perspective, but I need to keep broadening my horizons to try to understand others better. So that, because again, we don't know what's inside of another person and what they're going through. And so I just try to be conscientious about that as much as possible. And I think I've been better in recent years about that. And I'm still working on it. And I think we all should work on that.
I think that's such an important lesson, and one, I daily, I have to always get back to, and I do. And I know we don't want to keep you too much longer, but I'm going to try and keep it to a little short. And I appreciate everything you've said. And I
Yeah.
love this one. This is going to be another episode. I know I say that all the time, but this episode, I think each time we talk to somebody, I'm like, this is going to help somebody else. So this is
Mhm.
just so perfect. But besides Andrew, and obviously Weezer, we talked about, and a couple of the others, and Pearl
Hmm.
Jam, what are some of those other artists, whether they've changed your life or made a really heavy impact, in your life?
I think, yeah, besides the ones I've already mentioned,
Hmm.
I'll talk about a more recent one. So usually I get into music, recorded music, and that leads me out to a concert, right? That's usually the natural progression. But occasionally, and not very often in my life, have I seen a concert that just was so moving and so, again, it got to my heart, it shook me to my core, and it made me just want to be part of that for as long as possible. That more recent artist was American Authors, and I saw them on. So I went on the Rock Boat twice now, and they're
Hmm.
on both of them. And actually, that's like a good chunk of why we signed up for the second one, because they were going to be on there again. Because when I saw their show, I'd heard a few songs, and I was like, yeah, that's fine, that's fine.
Yeah.
But then I got there, and I was like, I don't know what it is. It was kind of like the Andrew connection from the stage to the audience. It's like they really make a point of making it feel like, hey, we're all just doing something together. It's not, and Andrew's described it this way too, but I feel like they're like that too. It's not just a person on stage or a band on stage talking at, singing at, whatever, an audience. It's, we're all doing this together. This is a performance, but it's also like, it's interactive, and it's connection, and we feed off of each other with our energy. And that's how I felt at those shows. And so we saw them twice on the first Rock Boat in 2021, and then back in January we saw them all three shows. Like, we kind of planned our days around, like, okay, well, where American Authors is going to be, because I want that
Hmm.
feeling. And so after the second boat, I came back and I listened to all the albums, And I was like, yeah, I really love the music, but I think I love it more than I would have because of the live show connection I had. So that's a very recent development. Like I've only been listening to American authors for not even 2 years.
Mhm.
But it's been like a quick, like, becoming one of my favorite artists, like one of those, if they tour anywhere nearby, and they haven't yet since I've kind of become a fan, then I would go out, like I would try to get out for completely. I really do like, there's some female artists that I've really connected with over the years. And it started with the first one I remember, like, just falling in love with. Well, I mean, besides like Tiffany, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Tiffany from the early
Mhm.
late 80s, early 90s. Like
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
like Tiffany, and she's, believe it or not, she's still making music and still on social media. Again, when
Oh,
I follow
wow.
an artist, like
That's
I,
amazing.
I
yeah,
love that.
she's out there doing her thing. And but where I really, like, kind of, like, got, so when I heard Jewel sing for the first time, like on her first
Yeah.
album, I was like blown away, like tears, like, oh my gosh, I love that. So a great female vocalist can really move me in kind of a different
Mhm.
way. And so I got really into Jewel during the kind of like when everything else was like grunge and rock, and then I
Yeah.
heard like folky Jewel with
Mhm.
her singer-songwriter stuff. I was like, this is the stuff right here. This is like, I love what this feels like.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I got a chance to see her in concert pretty recently too, which was awesome.
Oh,
But Michelle
That's
Branch
awesome.
is similar. I don't know if you're
Yeah.
familiar with
yeah.
Michelle Branch, but
Oh yeah.
Yes.
um,
Oh yeah.
everything she's done, she took some time off. She did some other things for a while. She became a mom.
Mhm.
And so, but she's released a couple of albums in the last couple of years, like last 5 years, that are magnificent, just so great. And then a new female artist that I've really been enjoying is Truesdale, and they were another rock boat find, and they have voices. So it's three women that they're friends. A lot of people think they're sisters apparently, but they sing so well together that it's moving. Like, I so when I was kind of researching for the rock boat, you know how when you're going to see an artist that you don't know at all, you're like, oh, I should
Mhm.
check them out. I should just
Yep.
listen
Yeah.
to some stuff.
Mhm.
So that's what I did for this past rock boat with Truesdale, like I did with all the artists. And I literally started crying when I first heard this song. I think it's called Wouldn't Come Back. I was like, I've it's very rare that the first time I hear a song, I have that emotional reaction. It's crazy. And they've had a couple other songs since that I'm just like, oh my gosh, like the way it moves me. I actually they were posting about their favorite lyrics, because all the artists, they have to do their social media thing too.
Mhm.
And they were posting about their personal favorite lyrics, because somebody, they did a Q&A, and I actually messaged them. I was like, that's my favorite lyric too, and that's so moving to me, and it's absolutely perfect. And they actually chatted me back, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I had like a fan moment. Like I was like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, they actually said like thank you for
Mhm.
complimenting their lyrics. So yeah, so I've been, so yeah, it's like Truesdale, and like I said, but going back, like Jewel, Michelle Branch. I love singer-songwriter stuff. I love good vocals, good lyrics, just, good music. There's so much. I could probably go on forever.
No, I'll have to check them out because I never heard of Truesdale. I've
Yeah, I haven't
never
heard of it either.
Mhm.
at all. So I'm gonna have to like do my little homework and definitely check out. That's another thing about this podcast is when people tell me like, "Oh, check out that," or
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
there was a band Zach told me about. Yours truly. It was
Mhm.
a female vocalist. Never heard of it. Turned it
Okay.
on, and I'm like, wow, like this is so good. Like there are great females vocalists in whether it's pop punk or um I I love to see it. And I was a
Yeah.
huge Jewel fan too. She was one of my first
Oh yeah.
singer-songwriters I love.
Mhm.
I was a huge Jewel fan. I've never gotten to see her. So hopefully maybe one day the universe will do that. But oh, she's just
She's
wonderful.
amazing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
She is. And I guess because we don't want to keep you too long and I appreciate all your time, but
Mhm.
where can the people listening find your podcast and find you and get to listen to this podcast?
Well, if you're interested in, Andrew McMahon's music and the podcast that I do, it's Something in the Wilderness. And it's kind of I took, and it may be obvious to Andrew fans, but something corporate and then Andrew McMahon in the Wilderness. I just kind of put it together. I was trying to figure out a way when I came up with the name
Yeah,
to incorporate Jack's Mannequin because I love Jack's Mannequin as much as the next Andrew fan,
sure.
but it's like it just it didn't flow as well. So Something
Yeah.
in the Wilderness, and you can find it on all podcast catchers. So like people like to do Spotify. I use Google,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't have to. A lot of people use Spotify and Apple and Deezer and Podbean, and I think it's everywhere. I'm pretty sure. I haven't found one it's not on yet. So, and you can even Google Something in the Wilderness, and I think it comes up now.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of a proud moment when like you could Google the name of my podcast, and I'm like, oh my gosh, and it's actually showing up in the results. Like, this is
Yeah.
cool. Um, and social media wise, I'm most active on Instagram. I post a little bit on Twitter, but basically it's just like, here's a new episode sometimes, not 100% on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And then Facebook as well. I'll do a little bit on there. But normally it's Instagram, and I interact more with people on Instagram. I love when people comment on posts or like about the episode. It is so much fun. I'm sure, if you've had this experience, or you can imagine, like when people chat me about things that they've heard in the podcast,
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Or like live shows, even like people have been messaging me about the short clips of videos that I just posted a little while ago.
Yeah.
And people are
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, he played that song. Oh my gosh, like, oh, are you gonna do an episode about this? And
Mm-hmm.
oh, I listened to, your resolution episode, and here are my thoughts, and kind of that interaction. I like thrive on that, and I need it actually.
Mm-hmm.
So I love when people reach out, and I've made so many friends through this podcast. I didn't expect that at all when I started this thing. I was like we were talking about earlier, we're going to put this
Yeah.
out into the world and see what happens. We're going to have
Mhm.
fun doing it, and we're just going to, put this out there. But I did not expect to have made friends and made like real connections out of this. So yeah, so that's my long-winded way of saying, if you kind of like the sound of that, check out Something in the Wilderness. And I don't know. If you don't like Andrew McMahon music, or you don't know who he is, I'm not sure if you'd like it, but definitely listen to his music, give it a shot, and then check out, the song, listen to a song and then listen to the episode about that song. I think it's a fun way to do it.
That's very, especially when it came to like when Bailey was talking about caves, and I listened to that episode. I admittedly did not. I
Mm-hmm.
got off the injured train for a little bit, and when I listened to your episode, and then it made me like, oh, let me go listen to now, and then go back and forth. And I think that's actually a really interesting way, and that's a fun way to do that, because
Mm-hmm.
I recommend it to anybody listening. Do that, because it's very cool. But again, Steve, thank you so much for taking the time and wanting
Mm-hmm.
to come on. And I'm so excited to get this out there. And again, yes, everybody go listen to the podcast. It's really, really great. But thank you
Thank you.
so much. Have a great rest of your
Thank you.
night. And thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, and thank both of you for what you do. Like I said, I love the what you're promoting here, what you're getting out there, and it helps people. We need it. We need
Yeah.
to connect. So we need to talk about this. So appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thank
Mhm.
you.
Thank you. And that was our conversation with Steve Parpart, host of the Something in the Wilderness podcast. Really enjoyed having Steve on, and we really enjoyed this conversation. And I truly hope you check out this podcast. So, in the links below, you'll find where to find Steve's podcast, wherever you get your podcast, as well as on our blog on our website. That's again at www.stereotherapypod.com. I always have to, like, in my mind, say that like 3 times before I mess that up. But yes, that is our website. And I'd love for you to check out Steve's podcast, because he takes so much time with it. And I really, really enjoyed this conversation. And Justine and I will see you next week for a special episode. We're going to do kind of a question and answer. Some people submitted some questions into our podcast, and I thought it would be a fun way for our second season for you guys to get to know us a little more. So if you have a question, send it our way. And remember, you can check us out on Instagram at stereo.therapy. And check us out there. But yes, please check out Steve's podcast. Again, all links below. Give him a follow on Instagram as well. And I'll have that link as well below. And Justine and I will see you guys next Tuesday. All right. Bye, guys.